Hi. Thanks for joining me tonight. And I hope that each of you have had a good day. And I imagine that as Rumi reminds us in the guest house, that each morning there's a new visitor that arrives. Well, I think on retreat, sometimes it's each moment of a new visitor arises or arrives. Some vulnerability that emerges, some judgment of ourselves or others, some joy, some irritability. All kinds of visitors show up when we're on retreat, and often pretty rapidly. And even with that said, I hope you guys had a good day. And maybe, no matter what visitors came to you today, I hope that perhaps you had an opportunity to work with mindfulness in the way that Helen began to speak about it last night. This dual awareness, if you will, this focused attention on wherever you've been today, whether it be in sitting meditation or walking, being able to tune in at different times to the breath, to the body, but also to begin to have an appreciation of this larger peripheral awareness. I certainly did, and thank you, Helen, for bringing that into this retreat. Sometimes it's a surprise. Often Helen and I don't talk very much about our talks, and so it was nice to be surprised about that last night. And I certainly noticed today that I was just awestruck as I continued to kind of meander through the day and be aware of this peripheral awareness. And a couple of things that I noticed was, one, each time my consciousness was in this larger periphery, I was much less self-focused. The self just sort of drops away. And that was delightful because I was reminded how big each moment actually is when we're not caught up in so much me, me, me. And so some of the things that I saw was, first of all, the sunrise this morning, just spectacular. And just ordinary. Happens every day. Sometimes we can't see it, but it happens every day. Walking downstairs to get some coffee, I noticed a bee that was struggling in the stairwell, possibly dying, possibly lost. I don't speak bee, so I don't know exactly. But I trusted that probably a better ending, if this was her or his process of dying, that it would be better to be outside than to be stepped on by one of us. So I took the bee outside and really got to see a little piece of its life. And then I saw this amazing grasshopper and realized that this grasshopper was just doing his life. Not really concerned so much about me. Not sure where he was going or where he'd been, but in that moment I recognized that he too had a life. and that along with the 7 billion people on this earth, there are even more of them. So, even if it was a bit of a roller coaster ride today, for some, many, or all of you, I bet some of that might have had a few moments of joy in this peripheral awareness. And I wonder if I could just ask us all to kind of pause and drop into the memory of today and see if you can remember some of the things that you might have noticed as you expanded awareness out. And if you don't mind, I would love to just hear from you guys, just kind of popcorn style. If there's one word or 2 words, something you noticed. Yeah, Heather.
A huge spider right outside our place and our cabin, and sat there for at least 5 minutes just watching it do its thing and build its web and weave its web, and it was just fascinating.
Awesome.
It was very orange. But big.
Orange and big. Thank you. Yes, Steph.
The beads on the asters out there. I was doing a lot of meditation. There are so many beads. It was really cool.
One of my friends who's a beekeeper told me that it takes approximately 1 million trips to the flower source or the source, whatever it is, for the bees to make a teaspoon of honey. I never eat honey in the morning in the same way. Deep gratitude for all that work. Yeah.
I was reading a book by Joseph Goldstein on break, and he quoted a Basho poem in it to the effect of frog jumps in pond, splash, something like that.
Yes.
And lo and behold, frog out there jumping in pond.
As on cue. Lovely. So all of the moments, spoken and unspoken, here's a wish that we all continue to explore this territory of peripheral awareness as we continue on our retreat until tomorrow and into life when we go back. So tonight's talk is really a continuation of Helen's talk, and continuing this theme of making friends with our mind and recognizing the barriers to cultivating this friendship with our mind, because I think it is important to recognize and bring awareness to these barriers so that we can work with them in the spirit of freedom, peace, and as Heather said in afternoon yoga, peace, joy, and love that is in abundance, even with suffering. So I'm wondering, how many of us in this room sometimes feel like we're fighting with our own mind? How many of us feel like our mind is not a happy place all the time? Yeah, not a happy place all the time. One of my favorite quotes by Anne Lamott is, "My mind is like a bad neighborhood. I try not to go there alone." I think we can relate. Most humans, okay, let me rephrase that. All humans, I'm quite sure, have felt this way many times. It's so noxious up there, let me get away from it. Thoughts swirl around in our heads, tugging at us, pulling us in various directions. And there are a few specific mind states that I think actually cause the most trouble in this neighborhood. And those are the three that I would actually like to spend a little time on in the first half of this talk. And I think these three mind states kind of hassle us on the cushion and off of the cushion. They show up loud and clear when we're in meditation, and then they follow us home. The first one that I'd like to talk a little bit about is longing mind, or greedy mind, or grasping mind. This mind that is consumed with desire. And the second one that I'd like to spend a little time on is aversive mind. This mind that is filled with ill will, anger, sometimes hatred. And the last mind state that I would like to give a little airtime to is the deluded mind, or the confused mind. This is a mind caught up in kind of walking in circles, not ever sure where it's going or where it's heading. So let's first look at longing mind, or grasping, greedy mind. This is the mind state in which we find ourselves really caught up in wanting more of something we have, or wanting something that we don't have. This mind state is constructed completely around desire. And it can show up in many, many ways. The desire to have more experiences. The desire to have better experiences. The desire to have more friends, more time, more likes on Facebook, more clothes, more. And once on this train, we can really get lost. Perhaps we get caught up in wanting some material object that we don't have, some adult play toy. Not that I would be speaking from my own experience, but a new bike, a new kayak, a new car, a new stereo system, anything that Amazon can deliver to my doorstep in 30 minutes or less, now that they have the Prime service. Recently, I heard a neighbor of mine talking about how he had to, and I emphasize had to, have a new lawnmower, riding lawnmower. Those of you that know Decatur know that our lawns aren't that big. And he really, in all seriousness, and I say this with a big heart for him because I love him, but he really wasn't sure how he was going to be okay if he didn't get this riding lawnmower. I see folks every day in my practice who are so unhappy because they want something from their spouse that they're not getting. Just the other day, I was sitting with someone and I heard the story of what a great, great time they had had on date night last weekend. And then there was the pause, and then came the frown on the face and said, I don't know why we can't do this more. And I really watched her have a moment of peace and joy in this memory of such a good time. And then like that, it was gone. All she could think of was it just wasn't enough. I remember growing up and we had this family joke in my house about my dad. So my dad would go to the local, this was, back in 1970, the local men's store in Athens, and he would come home with a big George Gibson bag. And in that bag, there would not be one sweater. There would be 4 sweaters, all the same, just in different colors. And I learned that if one is good, 4 is definitely better. And I unfortunately have carried that into my adult life, sadly. So this mind filled with desire can follow us everywhere and show up in all kinds of places. I'll tell you a little story that a couple of you know already, which is sad in its own right. So I was sitting on a retreat early in my experience of meditation. And we got there and everybody settled in and we had dinner and we went into noble silence. And after we went into silence, one of the participants came late. She had on the coolest tights I have ever seen in my entire life. You know Leslie. And let me tell you, I can't really, it won't do it justice, but they were like off-white and they had these really cool scenes of like black and white balloons on them. And so anyway, this was a 7-day retreat, and for 3 of the days, I cannot tell you what went through my mind. It was things like, I wonder where she got them. Going through every store I could think of. I'm not kidding, not proud. It never dawned on me that she got them from Etsy, which I found out later once we could talk immediately. Let's see, I got into comparison mind because noble silence went out the door with desire, and I stared at them and stared at her and thought, oh, I couldn't possibly pull those off like she can. And lots of other things. All around some tights. Yeah, some tights. Yeah. So we can really get stuck in this longing mind in ways that surely with rational thinking I wouldn't possibly want to spend 3 days like that. And we can also find this longing mind in other places too, like connected to ourselves and our work. You know, no matter what we're doing, we can always do more. It's not enough. The longing mind is intimately connected to the striving mind, this mind state that comes from this core place inside of us that we're not okay. Always trying to get somewhere, always trying to be someone better. Pressure, 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 more, more, more. So I would invite you just to take a moment and just check in. You know, do you ever find yourself in this mind state of desire? And if the answer is yes, take a moment to ask, how does it really feel when you're caught up in this belief? Because underlying desire is this belief that whatever is right here isn't okay. So now let's shift out of that neighborhood and check into another bad neighborhood and take a look at aversive mind. This mind state is constructed around judgment, around rejection of experience. When we're in this mind state, we see problems everywhere. We come into a room and the temperature's too cold. The picture on the wall is crooked. The table is really out of style. The way the hostess met me was unsatisfactory. In this mind state, we become quickly displeased and quickly devaluing of ourself, of others, of experience, of the world itself. We find ourselves angry, aggressive, and hurrying to move away from some experience. Some of you have heard me talk a number of times about my inner critic and the inner critic that so many of us share. And I think this aversive mind, when turned against ourselves, manifests as the inner critic. And, you know, this is a tough one. And for a lot of us that have a really hardcore inner critic, when we come to meditation, this voice, this thought stream is right there waiting. And it takes a lot of compassion and a lot of kindness to keep sitting and showing up and meeting this inner critic, not with aversion, but with kindness too, to say, I can be with you. But this is a journey. The aversive mind certainly is an example of one of those bad neighborhoods that Anne Lamott talks about. So I would ask you, just with the aversive mind state, this mind state of judgment and moving away from experience, to just pause and notice, is this a mind state you're familiar with? And then the last mind state that I want to just describe a bit and bring into consciousness a little bit more, this third mind state that makes it challenging to live life in peace in that moment, is the confused or the deluded mind state. And in this state, we find it really hard to make decisions of any magnitude. We find ourselves muddled in our thoughts, doubting our experience, and seeking someone outside of ourselves to find stability. We are easily lost in thought, and we don't quite know what to do or how to get wherever we're going, or sometimes not even how to relate to the world. Yeah, some real superficial examples are we sit down at a restaurant and we just can't decide on what we want. So we look at the menu over and over, and then finally we just go, oh well, we'll order the same thing we always do. We begin a project and the mental chatter begins, doubting our ability, encouraging us to forget it, and to go have a scoop of ice cream. Chocolate's good. Just when we sit down to read a good book, the mind has a better idea and leads us into the laundry room to do laundry. The confused mind state doesn't make a lot of sense. Jack Kornfield, in his book, The Wise Heart, tells a story of a man caught up in the delusional mind state. So as the man's driving down the highway, he hears a safety alert come over the radio. And the radio announcer says, anyone driving north on Interstate 187 should use great caution. There's a car driving on the wrong side of the divided highway. The man glares through his windshield and mutters, there's not just one car driving on the wrong side of the highway, there's hundreds of them. And yes, that too can be us. We all visit these mind states, actually with some regularity. When we begin taking up residency in one of them, they begin to influence our personality. As I said jokingly and not jokingly, I tend to be the greedy type. When these mind states seem as if they're controlling our lives, this can be quite exhausting, actually. And in fact, for just these reasons, this is often why many of us get interested in mindfulness. And indeed, mindfulness seems to play an important role in learning to make friends with our mind through using a powerful tool like mindfulness, because that's what mindfulness is. It's a great tool. We begin to create stability and spaciousness. And Helen talked some about this last night. But I want to go into this even just a little bit more. And as we create this stability of the mind and spaciousness of the mind, we really do begin to change our relationship with our thinking mind. And within the thinking mind, we find the greedy mind. We find the aversive mind. We find the delusional mind. We find the busy mind that every single one of us has been spending time with today. We find the critical mind and the judgmental mind. We find all of these in the thinking mind. And as we begin to practice, and we find and discover stability and spaciousness, this relationship begins to change. So let's take a moment and review the definition of mindfulness. I know we all know it, but let's listen one more time. Paying attention on purpose to the present moment without judgment. It sounds so simple, doesn't it? And yet, anyone so does running a marathon, frankly. Let me tell you, I used to sit on the couch all the time. I'd be like, I could run a marathon. That's not so big of a deal. And then I ran 1 mile, and I was like, oh, my God. And I think that's a bit like mindfulness. You ask people, are you paying attention on purpose? Are you present? Yeah, I'm present. I'm present. Until we sit down. And then those of us that actually try and practice this, we know. It's so simple, and yet it creates so much challenge for us. This mind is very busy, and it's rarely non-judgmental. So, paying attention on purpose to the present moment. I'm going to put the without judgment part aside for just a moment. But before we go further into attention and intentionality, because that's what we're talking about, I want to read you one more thing. This was written by, some of you know, this Dharma teacher, Sharon Salzberg. And I think it's wonderful about the human experience when attention wanders and we're just not so aware. So, imagine doing something very simple, perhaps something that you've done many times before, so it does not arouse a compelling interest. Something such as eating an apple. If you eat the apple while paying very little attention to the sight of it, the feel of it, the smells and tastes of it, then eating the apple is not likely to be a very fulfilling experience. Becoming aware of a mild discontent with the experience, you start to think, something's wrong with this apple. Or perhaps, I must not have really wanted this apple anyway, the deluded mind. You begin to think, if only I could have a banana, then I would be happy. But if you find a banana and then eat it again in a distracted or inattentive way, you will again end up feeling unsatisfied. Instead of realizing that you simply were not paying attention to the experience of eating the banana, you might start to think, my life is just too prosaic. It's so ordinary. How could anybody be happy eating an apple or a banana? I know, I need something exotic. I'll be happy if I go out and I get something unusual, like a mango. Then, perhaps with difficulty, you acquire a mango. The first few bites may be wonderful, a fresh sensation. Soon, however, you're finishing off the exotic mango in just the same way you ate the prosaic apple and banana. And once again, you're left feeling the feeling of dissatisfaction. That's the human experience when we're not fully attentive, which is why we have to get bigger and bigger and bigger toys, better and better and better experiences, more and more and more likes on Facebook. It may be odd to think that attentiveness has such a direct relationship with satisfaction. But when we begin practicing mindfulness, that's exactly what we discover. That no matter where we are or what we're doing, to a large degree, when we're present to the experience, the bees on the flower, the big orange spider, the grasshopper just being a grasshopper, when we're present to the sights, the sounds, the smells, the tastes, our body sensations, not only do we experience satisfaction, we actually often find we're experiencing joy. Paying attention on purpose to the present moment is really about cultivating awareness. It's so easy to forget that the human mind actually has two capacities. We are trained so hard in cultivating the thinking mind, thinking/feeling. We forget that the mind has a second capacity, and it is actually an even bigger, greater capacity, which is awareness. It's actually the capacity that is with us from birth to death. Even before the left hemisphere is online, around 18 to 24 months, we have awareness. It's very natural. But we spend very little time being aware of awareness. So we end up with a lack of awareness of awareness. And we spend even less time in this culture cultivating awareness. It's a Dr. Seuss book on awareness. So do this. Close your eyes for a minute. Just close your eyes. And just a second, when you open them, I just want you to notice what happens. So now go ahead and open your eyes. What happened? Don't overthink it.
Bunch of images jumped into my head.
What?
Bunch of images jumped into my head.
Yeah, exactly. You can't not be aware. But what you can be is unaware of awareness, which we often are, which makes for a lot of depression and a lot of anxiety. So how do we cultivate awareness so that we can become aware of awareness? This again is where mindfulness comes in very handy, through mindfulness of breathing, which I suspect many of you have been practicing today. We train the mind to be more attentive, to be more concentrated. Over and over, we get lost in thought, and we gently steer the mind back to the breath, just as Helen talked about the puppy. Doing this breath by breath, moment by moment, day after day, month after month, year after year, we continually increase the stability of our minds. And in order to be aware of the activity of the thinking mind, we must have a stable foundation. The other important key to creating a stable foundation is the practice of mindfulness of the body. Part of making friends with our mind is actually reconnecting with our body. In this technologically driven world that we live in, we're being pulled farther and farther away from embodiment. As we swirl around in our minds using this vast universe of technology, figuring out new technology, discovering new technology, without a connection to the body, we start to get trapped in this looping thinking, trying to figure out the problem du jour, typically only to find us still stuck at the end of the day. I don't know if you guys can relate to that, but certainly when I forget my body, I can. We know that our head sits on top of our body. We know that our brain is an organ just like all of our other organs in our body. But yet, most of us humans really walk through life kind of dragging this body along instead of being embodied, instead of living in our bodies. The tool of mindfulness helps us reconnect our mind and body, and thereby creating more of a stable foundation. You know, many of you who have taken MBSR know that for the first 2 weeks you spent 14 days intensely doing a body scan. There's a reason for that. That is an intimate reconnection. As we work this reconnection of mind and body, these areas in our brain are growing in gray matter. We are creating that bidirectional highway that allows us to use this body as a system of knowledge. And that's what it is. It is there for us from birth to death. And it is the knowledge system of the three that we have, right hemisphere, left hemisphere, and body. It is the fastest processor. It lets us know where we are and what we need and what's going on in our environment, and in this peripheral awareness, much quicker and much more intense than either one of our hemispheres. And yet, we don't spend much time cultivating mind-body connection. In the body scan, we go through each part of the body very slowly and intentionally. And this again brings us back to the combination of attention and intention. We bring the intention to pay attention and to listen to the body. The body, unlike the mind, the language of the mind is concepts. The language of the body is sensation. And as we connect with our body in yoga, as we so gratefully thank Heather for leading us in 2 yoga sessions today, she gave us an opportunity to deeply connect with our body. In walking meditation, we deeply connect with our body. In sitting meditation, we deeply connect with our body. We tune in. And the gift it gives back to us is our awareness is increased. Along with this stability that we are creating as we practice mindfulness, we're also cultivating spaciousness. For example, as we sit in mindfulness of breath meditation and we get lost in thought, the act of noticing that we've moved out of the present moment and we're somewhere in the past or the future, this act of noticing is actually increasing our awareness. It's increasing the space around the thoughts that allows us to see them as opposed to being so merged with them. And when we practice mindfulness of the present moment, otherwise known as choiceless awareness or open awareness, what we're doing is we're shifting the boundary to everything, to the peripheral awareness. And we sit and we watch the flow of life naturally come and go. And what we begin to cultivate is this insight, a big insight of impermanence. And impermanence, the acceptance of impermanence, really allows us to work with that greedy mind, that grasping mind, that mind that wants what's good to stay that way. It helps us work with the aversive mind, that mind that if it doesn't like it, it wants it to go away. The truth is everything has a beginning and an end. And as we sit in this peripheral awareness, we begin to know that on a deep level, not an intellectual level. We begin to live it. We begin to loosen our attachment. We begin to be able to deeply connect with life right here, but not need it to stay the same. Not need it so desperately to be different than it is. This is the gift of mindfulness. Li Po is an 8th century Chinese poet, and I think he has a beautiful way of capturing the essence of awareness in this poem. So he says, "The birds have vanished down the sky. Now the last cloud drains away. We sit together, the mountain and me, until only the mountain remains." So as we practice meditation here, day after day, when we're back home, we cultivate these 2 precious qualities, stability and spaciousness. And we do watch our lives begin to transform little by little. The thoughts of desire, ill will, and confusion begin to be more of just that, thoughts, as opposed to truths. Indeed, we all have lived as if thoughts are truths. In our daily lives, awareness shows up in a much more conscious way. We notice an unkind thought, and before where it would have become speech, now it's awareness in the form of a pause that allows us to shift. Awareness shows up in the shower as I actually feel the water against my skin, as I actually recognize the warmth, and I remember how grateful I am to have warm and clean water, something most of this world doesn't have. I don't really need that big new toy. I can actually be grateful for the water. Awareness begins to show up and notice all the things that have gone unnoticed that my spouse does for me each day out of kindness and love. And awareness shows up as those old familiar thoughts run around my mind like monkeys screaming, I want that, I want that, give me that. Oh, I hate that, I don't want that. And with awareness like a friend by my side, I can smile at the monkeys a little bit more. And sometimes I even find them cute. So, just to recap, it really is possible to make friends with our minds. It really is. And when we do, it's the best friend we can have because it's actually with us from birth to death. Other people come and go. And mindfulness can play an important role in this process. These three mind states, the greedy mind, the aversive mind, and the deluded mind, are the three mind states that most rob us of our peace. But as we begin to work with them, they'll show up. They'll be right there waiting on you when you sit next time. And as we identify them, there's desire. Oh, there's aversion. Oh, there's confusion. Nothing to do with them. Just say hello. As Rumi says, meet them at the door. Smile. And I am curious. I'd like to hear from you guys if this resonates with you. And this is where I want to bring back that fourth part of the equation. And that is without judgment. Because this is about being human. These three mind states have been written about for 2,600 years. Nobody escapes them. Well, my dog Magoo does, but none of us do. None of the bipedal creatures that inhabit our lands. This is it, you guys. And that last part of the definition, especially for us Westerners, is what gives us the hardest time. Like as if in some way it's shameful to own that we spend time in these states. No, welcome to being human. Welcome to the mess. Welcome to the full catastrophe, as Jon Kabat-Zinn says. This is it. It doesn't just happen to others. It's all of us. So thank you for letting me be one of you, and you be one of me. And even if you haven't noticed some tights recently, I'm sure you've probably noticed something else you'd like. So I'll end with that, and we did want to take, a few minutes. They're building a fire for us right now. In about 10 minutes, we'll be able to head out there, and for those of you that would like to sit around the fire and enjoy it, we'll continue to maintain silence, but just to have a little fire time. But we have about 10 minutes if there are any questions or comments about anything tonight or anything about practice. And I know it may be odd to speak when you haven't spoken, and I also can respect not wanting to speak yet. That's fine too.